Welcome everyone. This is Anna Ranyan, founder and CEO of Classy Career Girl, where we're on a mission to help all women find career fulfillment. Today I have a great guest that I am super excited to introduce you to. Nicole Lapin is the New York Times bestselling author of Rich Bitch, a simple 12-step plan for getting your financial life together. She's no stranger to breaking down complex business principles for all of us to understand, utilizing her signature sassy style from anchoring business shows on network television, including on CNBC, Bloomberg, and CNN, to contributing money reports to Today and MSNBC. And I'm super excited for our topic today because Nicole just wrote a book called Becoming Superwoman, a simple 12-step plan to go from burnout to balance. And so that's what we're going to be talking about today. So thank you, Nicole, for joining us today and for being here.
Anna, thank you. It's so good to connect with you. We have to do this in person.
Yes, definitely, for sure. So I want our audience to become familiar with your journey. And I know you've held a lot of different careers, from working as a journalist, to being on TV, to being an author. So how did you get started in your career, and how have you managed to grow to where you are now today?
Well, haven't we all? Right? I think a career looks more like a rope swing or maybe rock climbing than a career ladder these days. And I think especially for women, we have all different jobs in our lives, whether we're working for someone else or working for ourselves or becoming the CEO of our family and perhaps, taking time off to be a mom and every permutation in between, and then maybe starting another company. And so I've had a lot of different roles, but we all have to some extent. And I think it's about just taking whatever opportunities you have in front of you. And for my early life, I didn't have the luxury of doing what I love. So I had to figure out how to love what I did. And finance and business was the last thing I thought I would love. Super clueless and like the least likely person to be a money expert, for sure. I grew up in an immigrant family. None of us learned this stuff in school.
No.
Right. We learn like geometry. But I think if I were in charge of the world, I would teach how to do a budget or a business plan or taxes. Hello, that would be way more valuable.
Yes, definitely. We all need that.
Totally. And, I think it's a language like anything else. We just don't have a Rosetta Stone for that language. And I think that once you speak the language, that's the most empowering step. And then, if you went to China and you didn't speak Chinese, you'd be really confused. If you went to Wall Street, you didn't speak the language of money, you'd be really confused. But once I spoke it and then I spoke it to the world, realized it's actually not that complicated. And in the back of my books, I rewrite dictionaries in plain English without the jargon. You're welcome. Maybe this is why I'm single, because I rewrite dictionaries on my free time.
Did you find that when you started teaching about money that you started learning more too? Because sometimes that happens.
Isn't that so interesting? It's true. I think that I wanted a step plan and something very actionable. Like my brain, how does your brain work? Like around processes and systems. I like a good step plan, like breaking something really overwhelming down into steps. So I put together what I needed the most. And, the more I opened up about how I didn't know what was going on, the more others felt the license to do the same. I think with a lot of this stuff, somebody has to go first with tricky topics.
Exactly. So what made you, you've had these best-selling books and then you started talking about burnout. What was the big change that, made you write this book, Becoming Superwoman?
I think that we have leaned so far into everything that sometimes we fall over. In addition to teaching budgeting or business plan or taxes, like we mentioned, to kids growing up, I would teach boundaries and productivity and a lot of this that I learned in the School of Hard Knocks. And I think that really affects your career more than anything else.
Yeah. So tell us about your personal journey and how you got to that point of burnout, how you recovered, and what advice you have for others.
I think I self-prescribed work for a really long time. And it was such an important learning period for me that I wanted to, there's a quote, I'm going to butcher it, but those who walk through the flames, I love those who walk through the flames and come back with buckets of water for those still in the fire. And that was really important for me. I wanted to use my platform in any way I possibly could to help hopefully educate and empower and inspire. And, I'm also talking about living with migraine for the first time ever. That's affected my career in a huge way. And that's also something, the more I talk about it first, others, it's amazing how they open up and they're like, me too, or, my sister or my mom or whatever. And, I think that there's a huge misconception there as well. Like, folks who think it's just a headache or like just drink water. Well, no, it's not. It's a disease that affects millions of people. And, like during my anchor life, being under bright lights was really challenging. And, I feel like I was struggling in silence, but I think the more vocal and the more visible we are, the more we can all learn together.
Yeah. So how did living with the migraine impact your career?
I had really supportive coworkers and bosses, but I remember one time that I was anchoring breaking news at CNN, and it was really difficult to take time off the anchor desk. And I would try any chance I could, because it was really, what helped was getting in a super, super dark room, but I had a little wardrobe room at the time. And so I'd go in there and try to turn off all the lights. And, there were those little hacks that I did because, that's what I had to do. You deal with the situation in the best way you possibly can. And, I really worked with my doctor to figure out the best treatment plan for me. But, I think that a lot of folks who are dealing with that are struggling about, talking to their bosses and how to navigate your career alongside it. So I teamed up with Amgen and Novartis, the makers of preventative treatment, Aimovig, to try to help really talk about this in a way that I don't believe has been done before.
Yeah, I don't think so either. Like I've been in the career field for a long, long time, and it's not something that I think is being talked about. And I think there's so many people out there who are struggling. Maybe it's not migraines, right? But our listeners are maybe struggling with some sort of health issue. So did you find that your bosses and your coworkers were understanding of your illness?
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. We're all struggling with something. So it's what's your something? And I think what really helped me was opening up and being vulnerable, not being TMI at work. You don't have to tell your all the skeletons in your closet, but really being vulnerable goes a long way. And we're all human, we're all dealing with something. And so, looking back, I wish I had that time back where I was struggling to reinvest in my career. This more than anyone else, that investing in yourself will pay most dividends later on. And I think career advice, as you rightly note, is something that you should look at from, I think, 1, 3, 5, 7, 10-year goals. You break those down, and then you reverse engineer to figure out how to get there. Because it's like saying, hey, Anna, we're going to a party in LA. You're like, cool. What neighborhood are we going to? Like, do I need to wear something special? What am I bringing? Like, you probably have so many questions about the party. We don't have the same questions about our lives. If we don't know where we're gonna go, how are we gonna get there? It's like, you can't just put something vague in the, like Uber or a Lyft or whatever and imagine that you're gonna get there. So the same thing happens, I think, with your career.
So where do you recommend our listeners start? I say this all the time, but maybe coming from you, like when it comes to like planning out your goals and your vision, like what would be your advice?
So I like alliteration very much, probably too much. And so I break down goal setting into 4 F's. Family, finance, fun, and fitness. And fitness is not just physical fitness, but mental fitness as well. I think it's really important to prioritize self-care. I think it's the biggest asset or liability in your career. I did an amazing social experiment with a bunch of women where I invited them in and gave them a little whiteboard, and they wrote the top 5 things they value most. And they wrote great things, their jobs, their house, their kids, their dog. None of them wrote themselves on the list. And in the top 5 things, the top 10 things you value, like think about it for yourself. Would you even write yourself on the list? And that really, right? Exactly. And I think, it was really telling to me because we should put ourselves at the top of our priority list. We can't be of service to anyone else if we're crashing and burning ourselves. You probably spend a lot of time on a plane. I spend a ton of time on a plane. They say, put your oxygen mask on first before helping others. It's totally true. You have to do that first. So I suggest for migraine specifically, KNOW, KNOW. There's a lot of great career tips in particular. I have some on my website, NicoleLapin.com. And I think that, some of these taboo topics, like, I think if somebody goes first and if nobody else is talking about it, let that first person be you.
Yes, definitely. So if someone is facing burnout, do you recommend that they go speak to their boss, or is there something that they should do personally themselves before talking to their boss?
Yeah, there's a lot that you can do yourself. And so I definitely feel the difference when I don't do gratitude in the beginning of the day. I have a crazy schedule as you do, but I've also tried to really get rid of my busy badge of honor. I've recently decided that being stressed does not mean you're important. And it's far more important to be productive than to just be busy. And so when I start my day with gratitude, I can feel the difference, and when I end my day with gratitude. And then when I start by not looking at my phone for at least an hour in the morning, do all my morning stuff, and then before jumping into email through other people's agendas and firefighting, I figure out what my intentions are for the day. Because you can just basically respond to email all day, and then you're like, whoa, I actually have a job and I need to get stuff done. And that I think is the first step. Like, you really taking charge of your time. I think it's your most valuable asset. You can get more money, you can't get more time.
Definitely. I know. And that goes back to making yourself a priority first in the beginning of your day.
100%. And in the end of the day too, like, I think in the middle of the day, all sorts of stuff can happen, right? But you can really control your morning and evening routine, even if you have a job where, like, you're in a newsroom or you're a journalist, or, things come up in the middle of the day. But your nighttime routine can also be really sacred. I used to, trouble sleeping, and then I was like, what? Why is that? Well, maybe it's because I'm shining a bright light of my phone into my eyeball 3 inches away, trying to be on my ex-boyfriend's sister's dog's Instagram page or something. Like, what? For way too long, right? We've all been there.
Yeah.
So while we can't control a lot, and we certainly can't control anyone else, we can control ourselves. That's the only thing that we're 100% in control of.
Definitely. So if someone was to speak to their boss about having some sort of health challenge or burnout or chronic illness like you did, what would they say? Like, how would you speak to your boss about this?
Every boss is different, as you know, and I think that it might not just be one conversation. It might be a series of conversations. And I think that the more we open up, as I said, the more I think we just can connect in a more human way. And, I think that we all have that something. And so really owning what that something is. And that's what I've tried to do. I've tried to not only own my story, but own my message. It's one thing to just tell it, but it's another thing to say, this is me and you get all of me, not just a certain part of me.
Yeah, no, you can tell that you're very authentic and you're sharing everything. You're like, I'll tell you everything. And that's
yeah, I'll show you mine if you show me yours. You need to show me yours. Like, as long as you show yourself, I think that's the most important thing. I think self-awareness is also one of the biggest assets you can have as a human being, and also in your career. Just knowing what those issues are. Studies have shown that if we can create a cohesive narrative for ourselves and our lives, we're more likely to be successful. So instead of saying, like, I'm struggling, I'm just so overwhelmed and breathless about it, to really be able to articulate exactly what that is takes away some of its power.
Definitely. And I'd love to ask you, because I know you were on a reality show called Hatch, where you helped a fresh wave of entrepreneurs get their businesses off the ground. And we have a lot of listeners who are starting businesses and want to start businesses. And for me, I started my business because I was facing some burnout in my work too. So I'm curious, do you see women starting businesses to kind of beat that burnout, or what are you seeing, as you're working with entrepreneurs?
I think that we often have this conception that if we don't have actual equity, we can make up for that with sweat equity. And that is not necessarily the case, because, when you're starting a business, you are everything. You're the CEO, but also the janitor. And so, to some extent that needs to be the case, but you also really need to remember about that oxygen mask. You have to put it on first, because if you're not good, your business is not going to be good. And so, taking a moment out of, the grind is actually going to be more beneficial down the road. You can only look at your computer for so many hours in a day before your eyeballs bleed. If you just actually go out and you do a workout class with your friend, or you take a walk, or you go to the doctor, by the way, I think a lot of women say like, yay, self-care. And there's a bunch of memes on Instagram about self-care and putting yourself first. And I don't necessarily think that going to the spa is the only way to do self-care. Like, I am here for the pedi and the mani and the deep tissue massage just as much as the next girl. But I think like going to the doctor, taking care of yourself, that's so, so important. I mean, it sounds so simple, like it sounds so easy, but it's not, because we're not doing it.
No, and it's actually, even now that I think about it, it's even more important as an entrepreneur, because you're doing everything.
Yeah. And you have, in some cases, I don't love that it's called key man insurance. I think it should be called key woman insurance. But yeah, you are your business. You are your business card. If you work for somebody else, if you work for yourself, if you're starting that side hustle, if you're not good, like nothing's going to happen. You're not going to, especially as a solo entrepreneur.
Mm-hmm. So what is some of the best piece of advice you have for women who want to get their business off the ground?
I think first start as a side hustle. I did this before I started my own business. Did you?
Yeah. Many years.
Okay. How long did you do it for?
There was about 4 years when I had the blog. 2 years when I had the blog, I wasn't making any money. And then for 2 years when I started to generate some money.
I did it for about 18 months. When I started my production company, I did it while I still had a full-time job. And the reason I really suggest that is because sometimes it's not a jobby, it's a hobby. Like sometimes it's not what you should be doing day in, day out. You should just do it. Like if you bake cupcakes and you love baking cupcakes, and all of your friends are like, wow, you should really open a cupcake shop. And you're like, let me think about that. Let me try that on the side for a little while. What you end up finding is that it's not just making cupcakes, it's also sourcing flour. It's also doing accounting. It's also like, there are certain things that are not fun and, sexy about doing, being in business and taking that from us, just a hobby into something that you have to support yourself and your family with. So sometimes realizing what you don't want to do is just as important as knowing what you do want to do. And so sometimes you can realize, I do want to do that all day, every day. And I love accounting and I love sourcing and I love all the janitorial work that I have to do until I can hire somebody else. But sometimes you don't, you get it out of your system.
Yes.
And that's really important too.
Yeah, totally agree. So what is, we're kind of getting to the end. I think we could talk for hours because we both love this topic, but what is if our listeners had one action that they could take, when they leave today to find more balance, to battle that burnout that they're facing, like what is that one action that they should take today?
I think remember that no is a complete sentence, and to really find boundaries. But before you can create boundaries, you really need to define what those are. It's like countries or states don't have wishy-washy boundaries, right? That would be terrible. And we shouldn't either. And so we should just know that, if we had a date with ourselves, it's a date. Like I would think 1,000 times before canceling on you, but a lot of women in particular don't think 1,000 times before canceling on themselves. Like having a workout for yourself is having a date with yourself. And you should treat yourself like you would any other meeting, or even better. And so I actually put a right-handed wedding ring on it to remind myself that the most important relationship is the one I have with myself.
I love that. Yes, so important. Awesome, Nicole. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. I know our listeners are going to love it.
Yay.